Mór an honor agam bet and shut in you. I'm absolutely delighted and privileged to be here, and I'd like to thank Dr. Joe Mulholland for inviting me on behalf of AWARE. Okay, thank you. I'm also delighted that Joe chose hope as the theme for this session. I've been very interested in listening to some of the previous speakers, and it would be very easy for someone who has had no experience living in Ireland to feel a sense of doom and gloom listening to some of the realities that we're faced with. So I don't in any way want to dismiss the difficulties and the challenges that people are experiencing right around the country. But I do want to very clearly set out a story of hope. We've got proactive hope. We can. So if we look at neglect, and I took the theme seriously, looking to 2016. So if we're looking forward, sometimes it can be helpful to look back. So looking at a tenement house, a room in St. Francis Street in Dublin in 1913, 100 years ago. Thankfully, none of us live like that now. That little girl who's watching, we might assume, has mental health difficulties. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. If she did, the chances are that she would have ended up in an institution. Sorry, I just moved a little bit too quickly. Just like So O'Connell Street, Sackville Street, completely in ruins in 1916. Was it neglected? Well, we know it wasn't. It was rebuilt. I'm going to show you one more video. that's just a snippet of Cleary's in 1932. And then Cleary's as we know it today. So it was built and developed, but we know that it's not all right and enough to do that. We also need to maintain, or else the roof falls in and it gets flooded. So if we're talking about buildings, how much more important is it to be talking about our own mental health? The World Health Organization estimates by 2020 depression will be the single greatest cause of disability in the world. That's a figure that's been used and shown over and over and over. I question that. I think, why should that be the case? It's not 2020 yet, and I think we can turn that around. But the figures are quite stark. 1 in 5 of working age people in Ireland experience mental health problems. A recent research carried out by the INTO, the National Teachers Executive Organisation, found that 40% of teachers who are using salary protection schemes are because of mental health illness. That compares with a staggering 7% who have cancer. So mental health difficulties in Ireland is a very, very real problem. So if we're moving from neglect to hope, what do we want? So a definition of mental health: a state of well-being in which the individual realises his or her own abilities and cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. One of the reasons I like that definition is because of the onus on the individual, on each of us, to take responsibility for our own mental health. As was mentioned this morning, we have lots of charities, probably too many of them. We do work together, and I'll talk about that from a WARE's perspective in a few moments. But there's a difference between giving help for people with mental health difficulties, having help there, and for people's ability to actually take help. And I'm sure each of you can think of someone that you know who has mental health difficulties, who just for whatever reason will not take the help. It can be very difficult and frustrating for those of us who want to help them. So how can we recognise mental health? I'd like you to look at this character and think, what do you think this character is thinking? How do you think this character is feeling? And what do you think this character is doing? And now look at this lady and think, what is she thinking? How's she feeling? And what do you think she's doing? And now I'd like you to answer this question. Which one, A or B, has good mental health? B. Okay, would everybody say B? Mostly yes, a bit no. What if I said to you that A has won the lotto from Mars to arrive to the MacGill summer school and is absolutely delighted? And what if I said to you that B has suddenly discovered there's nothing holding her up? Would that make a difference? So the answer is we actually don't know. And we don't know who has good mental health and who is experiencing difficulties. And when I'm working with teachers, I'm always really particular to say to them, watch for the child in the class who's laughing, smiling, if it's not appropriate. A lot of us can mask our feelings and build up to more mental health difficulties. The coping triangle is my way of explaining cognitive behavioural therapy principles. It's very simple. If you think right now, if I could catch what you're thinking, some of you might be thinking, will I be caught in heavy rain later on? If you're thinking that, how might you be feeling? Worried? Anxious? If you're thinking that and feeling anxious, what might you be doing? Worrying about it. Somebody else, though, might be thinking this might be useful. If you're thinking this might be useful, you might be feeling relaxed and you might be listening. There could be someone, though, who might be thinking, I should have had a bigger lunch to keep me going. That person might be feeling hungry and might be planning on, as soon as she stops, I'm out of here, or maybe even before that, I'm getting an apple or something. So the point is, when we see someone like this, we don't know what that person is thinking. We can guess how that person is feeling, but we can have some idea of knowing what the person is doing. Too often in Ireland, we have tragedies, just as recent as this week, the last few days. So we have an onus to really take this on board. This is a key quote. What disturbs people's minds is not events, but their judgments on events. It's not whether somebody is experiencing financial difficulties. It's what that actually means to them. If they're feeling embarrassed, if they think they've let someone down, and most importantly, what they believe. And in my experience, people with mental health difficulties believe they're a nuisance, believe they're not good enough, they believe they're a failure. And reinforcing, trying to reassure them that they're not, doesn't work because it actually can reinforce it. So, looking at proactive hope, this is a nice slide of some people fundraising for Aware. I'd like to give you an idea of how Aware uses its money. About 10% of Aware's funding comes from the state. The rest is given by people who are supporting charities. They're fundraising, they're leaving their will, they're doing all kinds of things. And we have a responsibility to use that money properly. It was founded in 1985 by Dr. Patrick MacGill with a group of volunteers. It continues very much dependent on the goodwill of volunteers. There are currently 350, 22 staff and 12 board members. I served on the board for 3 years as a voluntary member and then joined the staff on a part-time basis 2 years ago. One of the key things about Aware is a very strong clinical expertise. We have a clinical team. Dr. Harry Barry, Dr. Declan Lyons and myself form a clinical subcommittee. All our services are externally evaluated because of the recommendations of some of them. One of the key services, the helpline, was closed down for a month last year to be restructured and redeveloped. I've just finished touring the country, sitting in on support groups because they have been restructured, strengthened, using very much a cognitive behavioural model. There are lots of services, and I'm not going to go through them each, but I would like to emphasise 3 in particular. There is an 8-session course that is free that Aware provides because of the courtesy and the huge donation from Tesco. It's 8 weeks CBT program that's free. It's Dr. Chris Williams in England, his course. It's externally evaluated. It's been evaluated in the UK. It works. I've done it myself. I really can't recommend it highly enough. Aware spends far too much money advertising that course because people don't know about it. There's a 6-session course that's also free that's online, CBT. That's developed by Dr. John Shari and his colleagues. We've evaluated that and that works. There's also a programme that goes into schools, Beat the Blues, which has become Think, Feel, Act. Since last September, over 40,000 secondary school students have had the Think, Feel, Act programme. That introduces them to the basics of what you think and what you do affects how you feel, helping young people take responsibility for themselves and their own well-being, helping them understand what depression is, anxiety is, and most importantly, what they can do about it. Aware has a brilliant website. One of the key features is the monthly lectures are now videoed and they're online, and there's an archive. There's about, I think at this point, maybe 16 lectures there available for anybody to click into. If we go back to this, what would Patrick MacGill say? This is a quote. What is the purpose served by all this demolition and waste? He was actually referring to 1916 in the First World War. I think it's absolutely brilliant as well that summer school has been hosted in his memory. And he was fighting in the 1916, the war in Europe, not in Dublin. My granduncle died in the Battle of the Somme. Thank you. So we know that for too many years, those men and probably women who fought for Ireland in Europe were neglected. So I think it'd be an interesting question. What is the purpose served by all this demolition and waste? There are 3 things that Aware is very proactively getting out. Dr. John Connolly is going to talk to you about suicide. Aware works to help people with depression and anxiety. But tragically, as we know, suicide has become a huge issue. We've become very concerned that people are misunderstanding 3 things. So I'd like to get these 3 things across. Number 1, just because people have thoughts, they'd be better off dead, does not mean that they're suicidal. We have parents right around the country very frightened because their children are saying things like that. We have young people very frightened. They think because they have thoughts in their head that they prefer to be dead, that they're suicidal. A lot of times they're not. Those thoughts can be very common. The second thing is, just because someone does think that he's suicidal or she's suicidal does not mean that they have to act on it. There are always options, and Dr. Connolly will talk to you more about that. And the third thing that we've become increasingly concerned about within Aware, just because someone has a diagnosis of depression does not mean that suicide is the inevitable outcome. Too many people are terrified leaving GPs with a diagnosis of depression because they're assuming that that is going to be their fate. If we look back, I wonder, do any of you recognise who this man is? I didn't. His name is Eamon Kant. He was one of the men who died in 1916, who was executed. Just before he died, he wrote to his wife, and he said, "My dearest wife, Anya, not wife but widow when these lines reach you. I am without hope and without fear, calmly awaiting the end. My poor little sweetheart, ever my comforter. God comfort you now. What can I say? I die a noble death for Ireland's freedom. My dying wishes are that you remember your state of health. Work only as much as necessary, and freely accept the little attentions which in due time will be showered upon you." Words of wisdom for us almost 100 years later. Bíodh mishnach agad the story in Machree. Have courage, O dear of my heart. Joseph Mary Plunkett, what did he write to Grace? We know the song, but do we know what he actually said? "My darling child, you know how I love you. That is all I have time to say. I know you love me, and so I am very happy. Your own Joe." So to conclude, Bíodh mishnach, courage, grá, love, agus dóchas, hope, for all of us. Gur míle maith agaibh go léir.